everything you thought about sleep was wrong? I mean, seriously, what if the very foundations of how you understand, how you prioritize something as fundamental as rest, have been completely off base this whole time?
Hmm.
Because here at the Deep Dive, we've learned more about sleep in just the last 50 years than in the previous 5,000. It's incredible.
It really is.
And what we're about to unpack today is, well, it's nothing short of revolutionary. We'll be diving into the surprising science behind why we sleep, what happens inside our bodies, our brains when we don't get enough, and crucially, how you can reclaim this vital biological necessity.
It's so true. The widespread misunderstanding and, frankly, the outright neglect of sleep in modern society is truly alarming, especially given its absolutely critical importance.
Yeah.
So our deep dive today, it's built upon foundational insights from really decades of meticulous research by Dr. Matthew Walker. He's a world-renowned sleep scientist.
Right. The name probably rings a bell for many listeners.
Exactly. And his work, it draws from vast studies, collaborations with, well, everyone from professional athletes to Fortune 500 CEOs. It just reveals the universal, non-negotiable relevance of sleep for every single one of us.
Absolutely. So our mission today is simple. We want to help you cut through all the noise to truly understand what sleep is actually doing for your brain and your body. We'll show you why most people are walking around completely unaware of the silent damage caused by insufficient sleep. Get ready for some serious aha moments, I think.
Yeah, okay.
And actionable insights that will empower you to prioritize your health like never before. Let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
So, okay, let's kick off with what seems like an almost absurd question, especially when we think about all the things we do while we're awake. Why do we even sleep at all? From a purely evolutionary standpoint, it almost seems, well, idiotic, doesn't it?
It truly does. It's a fantastic question because when you think about it purely from an evolutionary lens, sleep presents this profound paradox. While you're asleep, you're not finding a mate. You're not reproducing. You're certainly not caring for your young, who are probably vulnerable themselves.
Nope.
You're not out foraging for food, which is pretty essential for survival.
Kind of important. Yeah.
And maybe most critically, you're in an incredibly vulnerable state to predation.
Yeah.
You're just lying there.
Defenseless.
Exactly.
Huh.
Any one of those factors, traditionally, should have meant that sleep was strongly selected against in the course of evolution. It just seems like a biological weakness.
It's like you said, if you were awake and showed the behaviors that are totally normal during sleep, I mean, hallucinating, believing things that aren't true, being disoriented, having these wildly fluctuating emotions,
Right.
you'd be institutionalized. And yet, this is precisely what happens during dream sleep. And we think it's not just normal, but beneficial.
Precisely. And despite all these apparent disadvantages, sleep has kind of heroically fought its way through every single step along the evolutionary pathway. In fact, if you look back at ancient life forms, we can find sleep-like states, even in things like earthworms.
Really? Earthworms?
Yeah, which suggests that sleep actually evolved with life itself on this planet.
Wow.
And the implication there is profound. If sleep doesn't serve some absolutely vital set of functions, then it's arguably the biggest mistake the evolutionary process has ever made. But, well, as we've come to understand, it was absolutely no mistake at all.
So this completely flips the script, doesn't it? It challenges that common assumption that, wakefulness is the default state and sleep is just some necessary off switch we evolved. What if it's the other way around? What if sleep is the de facto state of all life born on Earth and wakefulness is what actually emerged and evolved from it?
It's a provocative thought experiment, isn't it?
It really is.
The evolutionary advantages of wakefulness, they seem self-evident, right? We
Okay.
need to procreate, feed ourselves, be alert to threats. Obvious stuff. But the less obvious benefits of sleep often lead people to misunderstand it and, frankly, neglect it. Most people, if they didn't know the science, would probably think sleep is just about the body getting some rest and the mind kind of going dormant.
And that couldn't be further from the truth. It's a complete misconception.
Totally.
During certain stages of sleep, your brain can actually be up to 30% more active than when you're awake.
Right. 30%.
It's nuts. And this fundamental misunderstanding is precisely why people view sleep as something you can just, shave off, or as an obstacle, something getting in the way, rather than the crucial, intricate, and deeply restorative process that it actually is.
Exactly. And this neglect, it's a pervasive issue. that, we collectively really need to address.
Okay, so if sleep isn't just a simple off switch or some passive state, what is actually happening inside our brains? What's this hidden architecture of sleep? How does it function?
Well, in humans, and actually in most mammals and birds too, sleep is broadly separated into two main types. You've got non-rapid eye movement sleep or non-REM sleep.
Yeah.
And rapid eye movement or REM sleep.
Right.
Now, non-REM sleep is further subdivided into 4 stages. They're unimaginatively called stages 1 through 4.
Keeping it simple.
Exactly. And they decrease in depth. So stages 3 and 4, that's what we typically consider deep sleep, the really restorative phase for the body, and also for essential brain functions like memory consolidation.
Okay, deep sleep, stages 3 and 4. And then there's REM sleep, which most of us probably associate with dreams, right? The one where all the wild, vivid narratives happen.
That's correct. REM sleep is named for those strange, rapid, horizontal kind of shuttling eye movements that happen under your eyelids during this stage. It's the principal stage for those vivid, narrative, often hallucinogenic, and very emotional dreams. It's a truly unique state of consciousness, and it plays a crucial role in emotional processing, creativity. Lots of things.
So these two types, non-REM and REM, they're not just separate states. They're in this constant, dance for brain domination throughout the night.
Yeah.
It's like a nightly cerebral war playing out in roughly 90-minute cycles in humans.
That's a great way to put it, a cerebral war.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating is how the balance of these two types shifts across the night.
Okay, how so?
So in the first half of the night, the majority of those 90-minute cycles are comprised of a lot of deep non-REM sleep, stages 3 and 4, but very little REM sleep.
Right.
Then as you push through the second half, especially the last couple of hours before you naturally wake up, that seesaw balance shifts dramatically.
Yeah.
And you get much, much more rapid eye movement sleep.
And this isn't just, interesting trivia. Understanding the structure has real-world implications for you, the listener.
Absolutely.
Let's say you usually get 8 hours, maybe 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., but one morning you cut your sleep short by 2 hours for, I don't know, an early meeting. You wake up at 4 a.m., you might think, okay, I lost 2 hours, that's 25% of my sleep.
That's the common assumption, yeah. But because REM sleep is so heavily concentrated in those later morning hours, you could actually lose 50, 60, maybe even 70% of all your REM sleep just by cutting those last 2 hours.
70%, just from skipping the last 2 hours.
It's a huge disproportionate loss. And this just underscores why every single stage of sleep is crucial. They perform different functions for the brain and body at different times. Shortening your sleep isn't just about less time, it's about selectively depriving yourself of vital stages. And that has disproportionate consequences.
So it's really not a question of which stage is more important, but that all of them are absolutely crucial for a fully functioning brain and body.
Exactly.
What happens if you, try to live without one or the other? Has that been studied?
Absolutely. If any stage of sleep weren't important, Mother Nature would have surely gotten rid of it, right? Allowed us to spend more time awake. But she didn't. Every stage serves a unique, critical purpose. We could look back to some pretty harrowing studies in the 1980s involving rats. These are studies that were difficult to read and, for very good reason, are unlikely to be replicated today due to ethical considerations.
Right. These were the ones trying to figure out if sleep deprivation was actually fatal. What did they find about just how fundamental sleep is?
Precisely. They found that rats deprived of all sleep died within about 20 days, which is, interestingly, about as quickly as they die from a lack of food.
Wow. That's fundamental.
That's how fundamental it is.
Yeah.
But then they tried something else. They tried to selectively deprive rats of just REM sleep while allowing them non-REM, or the other way around.
Okay.
Both types of selective deprivation were also fatal. But what's really striking is the rats deprived of only REM sleep died faster within about 30 to 40 days. Compare that to those deprived of non-REM sleep who died in about 50 to 60 days.
So, in a strange way, REM sleep, which is evolutionarily younger than non-REM, it seemed to be, a little bit more important from a simple mortality standpoint. Like, it's uniquely critical for survival, even though it's a newer development.
That's what the data suggested,
yeah.
It's fascinating. But the overarching conclusion, the big takeaway, remains. No single stage of sleep can be done without suffering significant detriment. It's this intricate, balanced system that our bodies simply cannot thrive without. It's truly a complex biological orchestration.
It's just astonishing, really, how society has come to view getting enough sleep. It's almost as if it's been stigmatized, labeled as laziness or slothful.
It really has.
I've even heard people almost whisper about needing 8 hours like it's some shameful secret they have to confess.
It's a pervasive cultural issue, absolutely. Pre-pandemic, especially, with increased working hours, longer commutes, sleep was the one thing that often got squeezed like vice grips.
Yeah.
People felt, understandably, they couldn't shortchange time with family or other activities, so sleep became the sort of negotiable or dispensable item on the agenda. It's seen as the easiest thing to cut, but really it's the most damaging.
And yet, you've said it so clearly before, sleep is not an optional luxury. It's a non-negotiable biological necessity. It is your life support system.
That is the biological reality. And perhaps one of the most frightening aspects of insufficient sleep is this illusion of functionality. So many people genuinely believe, oh, I only need 4 or 5 hours, I'm fine.
Right, the short sleeper myth.
Exactly. But if you look at the scientific evidence, the number of people who can survive on 5 hours of sleep or less without showing any measurable impairment, rounded to a whole number and expressed as a percent of the population, is 0.
0. That's a powerful stat, a truly sobering statistic. It reminds me of that drunk driver analogy you often use. Someone who's had 6 or 7 shots truly believes they're fine to drive home, but objectively, scientifically, they are in no state to be behind the wheel.
Precisely. Your subjective sense of how well you're doing when you are insufficiently slept is a miserable predictor of your objective performance. You simply cannot trust your own judgment when you're sleep deprived.
Wow.
And clinically, we see this often in patients with sleep apnea. They come in, they say, I feel fine, maybe a bit tired. But once they get treated, typically with a CPAP machine, they experience this transformed state. One patient described it beautifully, saying, it was as though with the sleep apnea device, I'd wiped a frosted window clear, and finally I could see again. This gradual chipping away at sleep night after night makes that deficient, impaired self feel like the new norm. People don't even realize what they've lost until it's restored. It's this slow, insidious erosion of well-being.
Okay, so what are the direct physiological consequences that are quietly building up in our bodies and our brains when we consistently don't get enough sleep? Let's maybe start with hormones. They regulate so much, right?
They really do.
Yeah.
And the impact is quick and dramatic. If you take a healthy young male and limit them to, say, 4 or 5 hours of sleep for just a couple of nights,
Okay.
their level of testosterone drops to that of someone 10 years their senior.
10 years older, just
Yeah.
from a few nights.
Just from a few nights.
Yeah.
In essence, a lack of sleep will effectively age a man by a decade in terms of this critical aspect of wellness and, virility.
Wow.
And we see equivalent impairments in female reproductive health, too. It affects things like follicular stimulating hormone, which is key for female reproductive health, leading to abnormal menstrual cycles, difficulty conceiving.
Yeah.
It impacts fertility across the board.
That's a profound impact right across the board. What about our metabolism? Does sleep play a big role there, especially with, rising rates of diabetes and obesity?
It absolutely does. A huge role. Get this.
Yeah.
If you were put on a diet of just 4 hours of sleep a night for a couple of nights,
Okay, just 4 hours.
at the end of those 4 nights, your blood sugar levels would be so disrupted that your doctor would classify you as pre-diabetic.
Pre-diabetic in 4 days.
In 4 days. That's a 40% deficit in your body's ability to optimize glucose. To induce that kind of metabolic impairment through diet alone, you'd probably have to gain something like 20 pounds of obese mass in those 4 days. Sleep deprivation does it far more efficiently and far more insidiously.
That is staggering. And the immune system, I know this is a big one you talk about, especially with everything we've collectively gone through recently. Understanding our body's defenses feels more critical than ever.
Indeed. And the link is incredibly tight. For instance, if you're not getting sufficient sleep in the week before you get your annual flu shot,
Yeah.
you produce less than 50% of the normal antibody response.
Yeah.
Your vaccination is significantly less effective.
Less than half the protection.
Exactly. But even more dramatically, perhaps, is this. A single night of just 4 hours of sleep leads to a 70% drop in critical anti-cancer fighting immune cells. These are called natural killer cells.
70% drop from one bad night.
From one night of 4 hours sleep, think about that. Most of us produce potentially cancerous cells every single day. And these natural killer cells are our frontline defense, our sort of immunological secret service. A 70% drop is a profound state of immune deficiency, and it happens incredibly quickly. Sleep not only stimulates the body to produce more of these immune factors, but it also increases the body's receptivity to them. It essentially restocks the weaponry in your immune arsenal every night, preparing you to fight off illness.
That truly redefines what damage from sleep loss means. It's not just feeling tired or mentally foggy. We're talking about a fundamental shift in our biological programming, even down to the genetic level. I've heard you mention that sleep deprivation actually distorts our genes.
That's correct. There was a remarkable study that found if participants were limited to 6 hours of sleep a night for just 1 week, which, let's be honest, for many people isn't even considered dramatic sleep loss.
Right, that's a normal week for some.
Exactly. Just 1 week of 6 hours a night significantly distorted the activity of 711 different genes. About half of these genes were suppressed, turned down. Many of them were immune-related genes, tying back to what we just discussed. The other half were actually increased, switched on. And these were genes associated with things like the promotion of tumors, chronic inflammation, cellular stress, cardiovascular disease, and metabolic dysfunction. This study profoundly demonstrated that basically no aspect of our physiology seems able to retreat from the sign of sleep deprivation and get away unscathed. Our very genetic blueprint is being altered night after night if we're not sleeping enough.
That's genuinely terrifying, that our genetic expression itself is being warped by chronic sleep loss. And speaking of cardiovascular disease, you've got some pretty stark numbers on that connection, too.
We do. The link is very strong. People who typically sleep less than 6 hours a night have, on average, a 200% increased risk of suffering from cardiovascular disease or having a heart attack or stroke in their lifetime.
200% increase.
Yeah. And prospective study, this one from Harvard Medical School, tracked people who had no pre-existing signs of heart disease. They found that those sleeping less than 6 hours a night had a 200 to 300% increased risk of calcification of their coronary arteries over the study period. Those are the very vessels that supply life-giving blood to your heart.
So the arteries are literally hardening faster.
Exactly. Deep sleep, in particular, acts almost like natural medicine here. It decelerates your heart rate. It relaxes your entire vascular system. You can think of deep sleep as the very best form of blood pressure medication you could ever wish for. It also drops levels of the stress hormone cortisol, and it shifts your nervous system balance away from that fight-or-flight sympathetic branch towards the calming parasympathetic branch, the rest and digest system. Even fragmented sleep, not just short sleep duration, is strongly linked to atherosclerosis, that hardening of the blood vessels.
So sleep isn't just a minor player in heart health.
Not at all. Sleep is just as heavy a hitter as nutrition and exercise in preventing heart disease. In fact, I'd argue it's the foundation. Think about it. 24 hours of sleep deprivation actually dwarfs the physiological and mental deficits you'd experience from 24 hours without food, water, or exercise. Sleep truly is the foundation upon which all these other pillars of health, diet, exercise are erected. Without sufficient sleep, they crumble.
Wow. It really is the master dial for our entire physiological system. Okay, and then there's Alzheimer's disease. This connection is profoundly disturbing, especially when you consider that you've even said, and it's a stark phrase, that wakefulness is low-level brain damage and sleep is sanitary salvation.
It sounds extreme, I know, but biologically I believe it's accurate. The relationship between a lack of sleep and Alzheimer's disease risk has really solidified into a four-part story.
Okay.
First, there's association. We found, through large epidemiological studies, that people sleeping less than 6 hours a night consistently show a higher risk of developing Alzheimer's later in life. They also tend to have far more of those sticky, toxic proteins, beta amyloid and tau protein, which are the culprits underlying the disease. Furthermore, people with existing sleep disorders like chronic insomnia or untreated sleep apnea also have a significantly higher risk.
But that's just an association, right? A correlation. Does a lack of sleep actually cause the buildup of these proteins, or does it just happen to occur alongside it?
That's the critical next step, causation. And yes, causality has now been demonstrated pretty convincingly. If you take a healthy adult and deprive them of sleep for just one night, just one night, or even if you selectively deprive them of just deep sleep while letting them get other stages, you see an immediate escalation in the levels of beta amyloid circulating in their bloodstream, in their cerebrospinal fluid, and measurable within the brain itself using brain imaging technology.
Just after one night.
Just one night. This confirms that taking away sleep, even acutely, can trigger the emergence of an Alzheimer's cascade. So this naturally led to the question, what is it about sleep then that normally de-escalates these toxic proteins? What's the mechanism?
And this is where that incredible discovery of the glymphatic system comes in, right? The brain's own cleaning system, literally washing itself during sleep. You called it Nobel Prize worthy.
I truly believe it is. Dr. Macon Niedergard at the University of Rochester made this remarkable discovery. We used to think the brain didn't have a waste removal system like the body's lymphatic system, but she found it does. She named it the glymphatic system. After the glial cells, these cells were once thought to just be the glue holding neurons
Like
together.
the support cells.
Exactly. She found the sewage system in the brain wasn't always active at high volume. It truly kicked into high gear, maybe 10 or 20 times more active, only when the mice in her studies were in deep non-REM sleep. And the most critical discovery, especially for Alzheimer's, was that one of the main metabolic byproducts this system was washing away during deep sleep was that toxic beta-amyloid protein. Just last year, scientists in Boston visualized a very similar pulsing, cleansing mechanism in sleeping humans.
So sleep is literally washing our brains clean every night, preventing the buildup of the very toxins linked to Alzheimer's. That's an incredible, tangible mechanism.
It really is.
And the silver lining here, despite how grim this connection sounds, is that sleep is a modifiable factor in Alzheimer's risk, unlike, say, genetics for many people.
Precisely. That's the crucial point of hope. Unlike many other factors associated with aging and Alzheimer's that are difficult or impossible to change, sleep is something we can do something about. In midlife, for example, when deep sleep naturally starts to decline for many people, we could potentially intervene with targeted sleep optimization strategies.
Right.
This has the genuine potential to bend the arrow of Alzheimer's disease risk downward. It's a shift from just treating the sickness sick care to proactively promoting brain health, true health care. It's really one of our moonshot goals for public health in the coming decades.
That's truly the holy grail, finding preventative measures. Now let's shift gears slightly to something many people struggle with: weight gain and appetite control. How does sleep factor into that equation beyond just, having less energy to exercise when you're tired?
Oh, it's much more direct than just energy levels.
Yeah.
If you're trying to manage your weight or diet while being sleep deprived, here's a shocking statistic. A staggering 70% of all the weight you lose will come from lean muscle mass, not fat.
70% from muscle, not fat.
Exactly. Your body, when it's underslept and fatigued, becomes incredibly stingy in giving up its fat stores. It holds on to fat for dear life. So you end up losing what you desperately wanted to keep your muscle and stubbornly holding on to what you wanted to lose fat.
That's completely counterproductive to most people's goals.
Totally. And on top of that, when you're sleep deprived, you experience these intense cravings, specifically for what we might call terrible foods. Heavy carbohydrates, sugary things, salty snacks.
Well, I know this feeling so well. When I'm underslept, all I want is carbs and sugar. It's like my brain just overrides any healthy intentions. So practically speaking, what's driving that?
It happens through two main routes. One is hormonal, and one is in the brain itself.
Okay.
Hormonally, when you're sleep deprived, two critical appetite-regulating hormones go completely haywire. Leptin, which is the hormone that signals satiety, telling your brain, I'm full, its levels drop.
Yep.
So you lose that crucial signal of being full, and you constantly feel hungry, even after eating.
Okay, so you're always hungry.
Right. And if that weren't bad enough, ghrelin, which is often called the hunger hormone, its levels increase. So now you got this double whammy. You're constantly feeling hungry because ghrelin is up, and even when you do eat a standard meal that would normally be satisfying, it doesn't feel satisfying because leptin is down, so you still want to eat more.
That sounds miserable.
It is. And on average, people will consume an extra 200 to 400 calories each day under conditions of insufficient sleep, just driven by these hormonal changes.
And you said the brain plays a role, too. It's not just the hormones making us reach for the pizza instead of the salad.
Correct. In the brain, using brain imaging, we found that when you're underslept, the deep hedonic and emotional centers, these are the impulsive, reward-seeking, almost addictive brain centers, they get revved up. They become hyperactive.
Okay.
At the exact same time, the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain right above your eyes that's responsible for rationality, decision-making, keeping your desires in check, it effectively shuts down. It goes offline.
So no brakes, all gas.
Precisely. The result. You're no longer making rational food choices. You're not reaching for leafy greens and a handful of nuts. You're instinctively reaching for the ice cream, the pizza, the cookies, the salty snacks. It's both your brain and your body conspiring against your healthy intentions, making good choices incredibly difficult when you're tired.
That explains so much, especially for anyone who's ever struggled with cravings or even addictive tendencies. And speaking of which, The link between sleep and mental health and even addiction is incredibly strong, isn't it?
It's profound, truly profound. What we know from robust scientific data is that when people are not getting sufficient sleep, suicidal thoughts increase, suicidal planning increases, suicide attempts increase, and tragically, suicide completion also increases.
Wow.
More generally, in my 20 years of sleep research, we have not been able to discover a single psychiatric condition, whether it's depression, anxiety, PTSD, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, not a single one in which sleep is normal. Sleep disruption is a hallmark across the board.
So sleep tells a profound story in understanding, diagnosing, treating, and perhaps even preventing grave mental illness.
So it's really not an exaggeration to say that assessing and addressing sleep should be a fundamental first step in almost any mental health treatment protocol.
I absolutely believe it should be standard practice, yes. And you mentioned addiction, too. Sleep acts as a critical stabilizing force there as well.
When you're sleep deprived, those dopamine-driven reward centers in your brain become hypersensitive. This leads to heightened reward sensitivity, increased risk-taking behavior, and greater impulsivity, all of which means you are significantly more likely to develop an addiction disorder if you're using substances during a period of sleep deprivation.
Right.
Conversely, when someone is trying to abstain and go through recovery, getting sufficient, stable sleep is a huge predictive factor for successful remission and sustained recovery. It's a vital stabilizing force for both your basic psychology and your brain's fundamental reward sensitivity. It really helps your brain regulate its desire systems more effectively.
That makes so much sense. And finally, let's touch on memory and learning. I know, just anecdotally, my own memory feels so much fuzzier, less reliable after years of maybe not getting enough sleep. What's the science here? How deeply does sleep influence our ability to learn new things and actually retain them?
Sleep is absolutely critical for learning and memory, and it works in at least 3 different ways, impacting memory before, during, and after learning. We have compelling data, for example, from studies on airline pilots and cabin crew who are chronically sleep deprived due to constant jet lag and irregular schedules.
Okay.
Scientists performed brain scans and found that parts of their brains, specifically the key memory centers called the hippocampus, had actually shrunk over time, a process known as atrophy. And critically, the longer they had been on the job, the greater the magnitude of this brain shrinkage. It strongly suggests a long-term organic physical consequence of insufficient sleep on critical brain structures involved in memory.
That's really concerning. But is it ever too late? Can you reverse some of that damage, or is it a permanent loss of cognitive capacity once it starts shrinking?
That's a crucial point, and the message is hopeful. What I would emphasize is that it is never too late to start sleeping better.
Okay, good.
We have solid data supporting this. For instance, in studies looking at midlife adults suffering from untreated sleep apnea, which severely fragments sleep, those who complied with CPAP treatment, which significantly improved their sleep quality.
Yeah.
They managed to stave off the typical onset of Alzheimer's disease and significant cognitive decline by anywhere between 10 to 15 years relative to those who remained untreated.
10 to 15 years delay, that's huge.
It's a massive difference. So even starting in midlife, improving your sleep can have a profound protective effect on your brain health and help mitigate some potential previous damage.
And what about the brain's ability to actually regenerate cells? Does sleep help with neurogenesis, the creation of new brain cells, particularly in that memory region, the hippocampus?
It does. We used to think the adult brain didn't produce new brain cells, but we now know that certain regions, including the hippocampus, do have some regenerative capacity throughout life. However, if you deprive an individual, this has been shown clearly in animal models of sleep, it significantly impairs the regulation of neurogenesis. Essentially, you lose the capacity for creating these vital new brain cells when you are underslept.
Oh, wow.
So it creates this terrible negative feedback loop. Sleep deprivation causes existing brain cells, especially in memory areas, to deteriorate or function poorly, and it simultaneously impedes the very mechanism neurogenesis that could help you recover or build new memory capacity. It's truly a vicious cycle, but importantly, it's one that can be broken by prioritizing and improving your sleep.
This really paints a picture of a silent epidemic.
And the findings are stark, really stark. In the spring, when we lose just 1 hour of sleep due to the clock change, hospitals report a 24% increase in heart attacks the following day.
24% increase from losing 1 hour.
Just 1 hour. Conversely, in the autumn, when we gain an hour of sleep opportunity, there's a 21% reduction in heart attacks.
Incredible.
It powerfully illustrates just how fragile our cardiovascular system and likely many other systems are, to even small perturbations in our sleep duration. And it's not really about daylight saving time itself, per se, but about the societal constructs when we're forced to get up for work or school, despite our bodies biologically needing that extra hour. We're being forced out of sync.
It's astounding that such a small, societally imposed shift can have such a dramatic and measurable impact on public health. But then there's perhaps the greatest irony, the medical profession itself. Those tasked with our health seem embedded in a system that actively prioritizes a lack of sleep. How on earth did we get here?
This is a deeply troubling legacy, and it has a rather dark origin. The very first resident training program in the United States was established by a surgeon named William Halsted at Johns Hopkins University.
Okay.
He was legendary for his heroic long stretches without needing sleep, and he rigorously expected his junior residents to match his stamina. What emerged only after his death was that Halsted's remarkable ability to go days without apparent sleep need was fueled by a significant cocaine addiction, which later transitioned into a heroin addiction.
Wow, that's the origin.
That's the origin. Yet his expectations, this model of extreme sleep deprivation and this sort of arcane practice, have persisted almost unquestioned in medical training for over a century.
That's a shocking origin story for a medical standard that still impacts patient safety today. And the statistics on current medical residents working these marathon shifts are truly damning.
They are devastating. Medical residents working shifts longer than 24 hours, often hitting 30 hours straight.
Yeah.
They make 460% more diagnostic errors in the intensive care unit compared to when they're working shorter shifts.
460%.
It's enormous. Furthermore, if you're undergoing elective surgery and your surgeon has slept less than 6 hours in the previous 24 hours, they are 170% more likely to cause a major surgical error during your operation. Things like rupturing a blood vessel or accidentally puncturing an organ.
That's terrifying for patients.
It is. And the irony just continues. A medical resident who has just finished one of these 30-hour shifts is 168% more likely to get into a serious car crash on their drive home. Often, they end up right back in the emergency room, but this time as a patient rather than a doctor.
This raises such a profound ethical dilemma. If doctors take an oath to, first, do no harm, placing them in these known sleep-deprived conditions statistically guarantees they will do more harm. So what are the systemic forces keeping this archaic, dangerous practice alive? Is it just that old boys network mentality?
Part of it is certainly that hazing mentality. We went through it, so you have to suffer too. There's also the argument, often cited, of continuity of care, the idea that frequently switching residents disrupts patient care.
Right.
However, this is largely debunked when you look at highly effective medical systems in countries like New Zealand, France, Switzerland. They train excellent residents in 5 years or less, with shifts typically capped at 16 hours, and they consistently demonstrate higher quality healthcare outcomes than the U.S. in many areas.
So that argument doesn't really hold water.
Not really. Another huge problem is the profound lack of education on sleep within medicine. Medical residents, on average, receive only about an hour and a half to 2 hours of dedicated education on sleep during their entire training program.
An hour and a half on something that affects a third of our lives.
Exactly. Despite sleep impacting virtually every patient they will ever see in every specialty, it's a staggering oversight.
It seems the resistance to change is incredibly strong. What arguments have you found actually resonate when trying to advocate for safer working hours within these institutions?
It is very strong. I've tried lobbying, using the statistics of patient harm, appealing to compassion for the young residents burning out, but often it falls on deaf ears. What I've unfortunately realized is that you often have to speak in the currency that medical institutions and administrators truly listen to. Dollars and cents.
Malpractice.
Exactly. When you start quantifying the staggering costs associated with malpractice lawsuits stemming directly from errors caused by insufficient sleep, that's when they start paying attention. It's a pragmatic, if somewhat cynical, reality of driving change in these systems.
That's a sobering but perhaps realistic assessment. Now let's shift focus to another population that's acutely and maybe even more vulnerably affected. Adolescents. This incessant model of marching back school start times earlier and earlier is really damaging our next generation, often without parents even realizing the full scope of the impact.
It's a critical public health issue, truly. The scientific evidence is overwhelming and unequivocal. When schools shift to later start times, allowing teenagers to sleep more in alignment with their natural biology, academic grades increase significantly, Truancy rates decrease, behavioral problems lessen, and psychological and psychiatric referrals go down.
So better mental health, better grades.
Yes, but what's even more remarkable, perhaps, is that the life expectancy of those students actually increases.
Life expectancy. How?
This is largely due to a staggering reduction, often around 70% in road traffic accidents among students when start times are shifted later. Car crashes are the leading cause of death in late-stage adolescent teens.
70% reduction.
70%. For context, anti-lock brake systems, which were hailed as a safety revolution, only dropped accident rates by maybe 20–25%. Sleep, just aligning school schedules with biology, offers a 70% reduction in the leading killer of teenagers. If our goal as educators is truly to educate and keep our children safe, then we are failing them spectacularly with these dangerously early school start times.
As a parent of teens myself, I see how incredibly difficult it is to wake them up at 6 or 6:30 a.m. It feels unnatural. And it's not just laziness, right? There's a fundamental biological mismatch at play during adolescence. Their natural sleep rhythm is just different from adults or younger kids.
Absolutely. It's not laziness at all, it's biology. During adolescence, there's a well-documented natural biological shift in their internal 24-hour circadian rhythm. It shifts forward, causing them to naturally want to go to bed later and wake up later. Asking a teenager to wake up at 7 a.m., let alone earlier, is the biological equivalent of asking an adult to wake up at 3:30 or 4:00 a.m. and expect them to be attentive and learn complex information.
Wow.
They're essentially being educated amnesic. The information goes in one ear and straight out the other because their brains simply aren't physiologically ready to learn effectively that early. And on weekends, when they sleep in until noon, they're not being lazy. They're desperately trying to sleep off a chronic sleep debt that we as a society have unfairly lumbered them with during the school week.
And parents often don't see it, do they?
There's a significant parent-to-child mismatch. Studies show over 70% of parents think their teens are getting sufficient sleep, when in reality, objective data shows less than 15% actually are. This leads to a sort of unintentional parent-to-child transmission of sleep neglect, normalizing this unhealthy pattern.
And how does this chronic undersleeping impact their still developing brains? It's not just about grades or moodiness in the morning, but about fundamental brain architecture, isn't it?
Precisely. The brain doesn't finish fully developing until around age 25, and sleep plays an absolutely critical dynamic role throughout this process. In early life, sleep helps wire up the brain, creating vast networks of connections. But during the crucial teenage years, sleep's role shifts significantly towards synaptic pruning.
Pruning, like gardening.
It's exactly like gardening. It's sculpting the brain for efficiency, selectively removing unnecessary connections and strengthening the important ones needed for optimal adult functioning. If you are chronically undersleeping a teenager during this critical developmental window, you are effectively stunting their brain development. You're impeding this essential sculpting process, potentially with lifelong consequences for cognitive function and mental health.
So what is the ideal amount of sleep for teens, and what should schools realistically be aiming for? It seems like this is a solvable problem, despite the logistical hurdles people always bring up.
For adolescents and young teens, the scientific consensus on ideal sleep duration is typically between 8 to 10 hours per night, maybe even 11 for some growing teens. For specific age-based guidelines, I always recommend checking the National Sleep Foundation website. They have excellent resources.
Okay, 8 to 10 or 11 hours.
As for school start times, based purely on the biological and educational science, my recommendation for high schools would be 10 a.m. at the very, very minimum.
10 a.m.? That sounds radical to some.
I understand it sounds radical within our current structure, and I acknowledge there are logistical challenges, bus routes, parents' work schedules, after-school activities, but honestly, we put people on the moon. I firmly believe we can solve the logistics of school bus schedules if we prioritize our children's health and education. The biggest hurdle is often the mental one, getting parents, administrators, and communities to accept that this change is necessary and beneficial despite the inconvenience. We have the data, now we desperately need the collective will to act on it.
It's a powerful case. Now, what about common medications often prescribed to young people, like Adderall and Ritalin for ADHD, or SSRIs for depression? How do these interact with sleep in kids who might already be struggling with disrupted sleep patterns?
It's a really important consideration. It's unfortunate in a way that the most common first-line treatments for ADHD, like Adderall and Ritalin, are essentially amphetamine-like stimulants. Now, I'm not dismissing the reality of ADHD or being anti-medication. It can be very helpful for many. But these are fundamentally very strong wake-promoting drugs. Kids diagnosed with ADHD often already have significantly disrupted sleep patterns as part of the condition itself. Giving them strong stimulants, especially if timed poorly, can further exacerbate sleep problems, creating this vicious cycle of poor daytime focus leading to medication, which then leads to worse nighttime sleep, which worsens daytime focus, and so on.
Oh, real catch-22.
Exactly. We need to think much more carefully about the timing of these medications. Should they be given earlier? Are there longer-acting or different formulations? And ideally, work towards developing effective ADHD treatments that are less destructive to sleep architecture. Similarly with SSRIs, the common antidepressants like Prozac or Zoloft, one of their known side effects is often a significant reduction in REM sleep.
And REM is crucial for emotional processing, as you said.
Precisely. REM sleep provides a form of emotional first aid or overnight therapy, helping us process difficult experiences and regulate our mood. If sleep disruption itself is a predictor and symptom of depression, and if REM sleep specifically helps alleviate emotional distress, then we should perhaps reevaluate prescribing medications that actively suppress this vital stage. Maybe we need to consider alternative antidepressant classes, or, again, focus on optimizing the timing of administration to try and protect REM sleep as much as possible, especially in developing brains.
These are such critical nuances. Okay, this has been a lot of heavy but absolutely vital information about the problems with sleep deprivation. For you, the listener, who is now hopefully convinced and wants to take charge of your own sleep, what are some of the best evidence-based practices? And just a quick disclaimer, right? These tips are for optimizing sleep in generally healthy individuals, not for curing clinical disorders like chronic insomnia or sleep apnea. Those really require specific medical intervention, like cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBTI, or CPAP machines.
That's a crucial disclaimer, thank you. Yes, these are lifestyle adjustments for better sleep hygiene. For optimizing sleep, I usually offer 5 key tips, plus a bonus one. The first is temperature. Your brain and body need to drop their core temperature by about 1 degree Celsius, which is roughly 2 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit, in order to initiate sleep and then stay asleep.
Okay, cool down to sleep.
Exactly. This is why you'll always find it easier to fall asleep in a room that's too cold versus one that's too hot. My general recommendation for the ideal bedroom temperature for most people is around 65 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 18.3 degrees Celsius. Find what works for you, but cool is generally better.
This is something I've really leaned into personally. For years, my partner liked a much warmer room than I did, and I'd just toss and turn feeling like I was burning up. Eventually, I discovered the absolute joy of a colder sleeping environment, and I always find my feet sticking out from under the covers. It's funny how our bodies intuitively seek that temperature drop.
That's fantastic that you found what works. And it makes perfect biological sense. Your hands and feet, and also your head, are incredible radiators of heat. They're highly vascular, packed with blood vessels close to the surface, perfectly designed to draw heat out from your core and evacuate it into the surrounding cool air. So you're wise in sticking your feet out. They are wonderful, natural thermal discharges.
Huh. Good to know.
This is also why taking a hot bath or shower before bed can actually promote sleep, which seems counterintuitive, right?
Yeah, you'd think it would warm you up too much.
But what happens is you get in the hot water, all the blood rushes to the surface of your skin, you vasodilate. Then, when you get out of the bath or shower into the cooler air, your core body temperature plummets rapidly because all that heat is escaping from your skin surface. That rapid drop in core temperature is a powerful signal for sleep. It's called the warm bath effect, and it's a great, simple trick for many people.
That makes complete sense now. Okay, cooling down is key. What's the second tip for better sleep?
The second tip, and arguably the most important one, is regularity. Go to bed and wake up at the same time every single day.
Every day, including weekends.
Including weekends. As much as possible. Even if you've had a bad night of sleep, resist the temptation to sleep in much later the next morning, or go to bed significantly earlier the next night. Don't try to aggressively make up for lost sleep by disrupting your schedule.
Why is consistency so important?
The reason regularity is king is because your brain contains a master 24-hour clock, the suprachiasmatic nucleus. This clock expects and thrives best under conditions of predictable regularity. Sticking to a consistent sleep-wake schedule anchors your sleep rhythm and dramatically improves both the quantity and, crucially, the quality of your sleep over time. Consistency truly is key.
So if I typically aim for 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., but one night I really struggle and maybe only get 5 hours tossing and turning, I should still force myself to get up at 6 a.m. and then go to bed around 10 p.m. the next night, not earlier. Don't try to nap heavily or go to bed at 8 p.m. to compensate.
It's exactly right. Stick to your regular wake-up time as much as possible. You might feel tired during the day, which is normal, but maintaining that consistent wake time helps reset your clock for the following night. Going to bed super early might feel tempting, but it can sometimes backfire and lead to waking up in the middle of the night. Stick to the schedule.
Okay.
And related to timing, it's also really helpful to understand your natural chronotype. Are you inherently a morning type, an evening type, or somewhere in between?
A lark or an owl?
Precisely. This preference is largely genetically determined. Research suggests about a third of the population falls roughly into each category, early, late, or intermediate. And importantly, you can't really force a true night owl to become a happy, functional morning person long-term, or vice versa.
Yeah.
There's maybe only about 30 minutes of wiggle room that you can realistically shift your natural chronotype through behavior.
So trying to force it is just fighting biology.
Pretty much. You can find out your type relatively easily using questionnaires online. Search for the Morningness Eveningness Questionnaire, or MEQ. The key takeaway is that your sleep quality and overall well-being will generally be maximized when you sleep in harmony with your natural chronotype, rather than constantly fighting against it because of societal pressures like early work start times.
That's useful. Also, related to timing and regularity, what about technology use before bed? That seems like a huge disruptor for many people.
Oh, absolutely. Our devices, phones, tablets, computers are meticulously designed to capture and hold our attention, activating our brains. This activation directly combats sleepiness and often leads to what some researchers call sleep procrastination, delaying bedtime because you're absorbed in scrolling or watching something.
Yeah.
We all are sometimes. If you absolutely must have your phone in the bedroom, one small behavioral trick is to only use it while standing up. It makes it less comfortable and less likely you'll drift off while using it. More broadly, though, try to create a tech-free buffer zone in the last hour, or at least 30 minutes, before bed. Avoid anything that's cognitively demanding or emotionally activating, checking work emails, getting into intense news cycles, watching action movies, and definitely try to avoid those accidental naps on the couch while watching TV late at night, as even short naps close to bedtime can significantly disrupt your main sleep architecture later.
Standing up with the phone, that's a clever little hack.
Mhm.
Okay, regularity and managing tech. What's next on your list for optimizing sleep?
Third is darkness. We are fundamentally a dark-deprived society in this modern era of ubiquitous artificial light, and we need darkness, specifically darkness at night, to trigger the timely release of a crucial hormone called melatonin.
Ah, melatonin, the sleep hormone.
Well, it's often called the sleep hormone, but it's more accurate to call it the hormone of darkness, or maybe the vampire hormone. It doesn't powerfully generate sleep itself, but it helps time the healthy onset of sleep. It tells your brain, it's dark, it's nighttime, start preparing for sleep.
Okay, so how do we leverage darkness?
In the last hour before your intended bedtime, try deliberately dimming down half the lights in your house. Avoid bright overhead lights. Use lamps. You'd be surprised how soporific just reducing ambient light exposure can be. And then, reverse the logic in the morning. Get out and get at least 30 to 40 minutes of direct sunlight exposure as early as possible after waking.
Sunlight in the morning.
Yes. Bright light exposure in the morning is powerful. It slams the brakes on melatonin production, signaling to your brain that the day has started, helping you feel more alert and awake. It also helps set a strong anchor for your circadian rhythm, which paradoxically leads to building up healthy sleep pressure, driven by a chemical called adenosine throughout the day, ultimately resulting in better, deeper sleep that night. So darkness at night, light in the morning.
So that explains why sometimes on a full moon, even with blackout curtains, some people feel their sleep is disrupted. Could that tiny bit of extra light sneaking in be enough to subtly impact melatonin? I always wondered if there was something more mystical going on there.
It could certainly be part of the explanation for some individuals. While it's obviously not as strong as direct sunlight or bright indoor lights, the increased ambient luminance from a full moon can potentially be enough to slightly decrease melatonin levels in sensitive people. Our bodies are surprisingly attuned to the light-dark cycle.
Interesting. Now, speaking of melatonin, what about taking melatonin supplements? They're incredibly popular. Do they actually work?
This is a really common question. As I mentioned, melatonin primarily helps time the onset of sleep. It doesn't generate deep, restorative sleep itself. For people with diagnosed circadian rhythm disorders or for managing jet lag appropriately timed, low-dose melatonin can be quite effective. It's like giving your internal clock a nudge in the right direction.
Okay, so for jet lag, maybe?
Yes. But for the average person struggling with general sleep difficulties, especially if they're under 50 and don't have jet lag. Multiple placebo-controlled studies show very little objective improvement in sleep duration or quality from taking melatonin. Think of melatonin as the starting official at a 100-meter race. It fires the starting pistol to get the race underway, but it doesn't participate in the race itself. Other brain chemicals and processes are the actual racers generating sleep.
That's great analogy.
And a significant caution is needed. In the U.S., melatonin is classified as a supplement, not a drug, meaning it's largely unregulated by the FDA. Studies have found that the actual dose in over-the-counter pills can vary wildly, sometimes containing 80% less melatonin than stated, other times containing nearly 500% more.
Wow, that's a huge variation.
It is. And most people also tend to take far too high a dose, often 5 or 10 milligrams or even more. Physiologically, the recommended dose for timing purposes is typically much lower, around 0.5 to 3 milligrams. Taking excessively high doses can sometimes paradoxically worsen sleep or, over time, signal your own brain to shut down its natural melatonin production, potentially leading to dependence. So use it cautiously at low doses and ideally under guidance if using it long-term.
Understood. That's crucial context about melatonin. Okay, temperature, regularity, darkness. What are the last two key tips in your toolkit?
Fourth is alcohol. Alcohol is probably the single most misunderstood sleep aid out there. Many people think a nightcap helps them sleep, but scientifically it's anything but helpful for actual sleep quality.
How so? It makes people feel sleepy.
It does make people feel sleepy initially because alcohol is a class of drugs we call the sedatives. But sedation is not natural sleep. If you look at the brainwave activity of someone sleeping under the influence of alcohol, it doesn't resemble naturalistic sleep stages. It's a kind of artificial unconsciousness.
Okay, so sedation isn't sleep. What else does it do?
Secondly, alcohol significantly fragments your sleep, particularly in the second half of the night. As the sedative effects wear off, your body often experiences a rebound effect, a kind of rubber banding stimulant reaction, which triggers the fight or flight system and leads to multiple brief awakenings, even if you don't fully remember them. This leaves you feeling unrefreshed.
Ah, the 3 a.m. wide-awake phenomenon after a few drinks.
Exactly. And thirdly, alcohol is one of the most potent suppressors of REM sleep, or dream sleep, that we know of. It heavily blocks that crucial stage involved in emotional processing, memory integration, and creativity. Even just a glass of wine or beer with dinner can have a measurable negative impact on sleep architecture, particularly REM sleep. So my strong advice is to avoid alcohol, especially in the hours leading up to bedtime. If you're serious about optimizing your sleep, the nightcap is really detrimental.
Good to know. And finally, the fifth tip, caffeine. This one's tough for many of us, myself included, given how ingrained coffee and tea are in our daily routines.
Fifth is indeed caffeine. Most people know it's a stimulant and alerting substance. What they often don't appreciate is its remarkable duration of action in the body.
How long does it actually stick around?
Caffeine has an average half-life of about 5 to 6 hours. That means after 5 or 6 hours, half the caffeine you consumed is still circulating in your system. But it also have a quarter life of roughly 10 to 12 hours.
Quarter life.
Yeah. So if you have a cup of coffee at 2 p.m., that means by midnight, a quarter of that caffeine could still be actively circulating in your brain, interfering with your sleep architecture, long after you think its effects have worn off.
Wow, 2 p.m. coffee affecting midnight sleep.
Absolutely. And even if you're someone who says, oh, I can have an espresso after dinner and fall asleep just fine, the caffeine might not prevent you from falling asleep, but it significantly degrades the quality of your sleep once you are asleep. Specifically, caffeine has been shown to decrease the amount of deep K-12 REM sleep, stages 3 and 4 you get, sometimes by up to 20%.
20% less deep sleep.
Yes, which functionally is like aging your deep sleep quality by about a decade or more. This leads to waking up feeling unrefreshed, even if you slept for a full 8 hours. And what happens then? You feel tired, so you reach for more caffeine the next morning to compensate, perpetuating this vicious cycle of poor sleep, leading to more caffeine use, leading to poorer sleep that many people don't even recognize they're trapped in. Limiting caffeine, especially afternoon, is a powerful lever for improving sleep quality.
So definitely no more afternoon coffee for me if I want that restorative deep sleep.
Yeah.
Okay, those are 5 great actionable tips. Any bonus tips for managing things like anxiety, which often gets in the way of sleep, or just generally improving sleep beyond those core 5?
Yes, absolutely. A big bonus tip is simply walk it out, or rather exercise regularly. Consistent physical activity is almost guaranteed to improve your sleep quality and duration. Just be mindful not to do really vigorous exercise too close to bedtime, as that can be activating for some people. Morning or afternoon exercise is generally best for sleep benefits.
Okay, exercise is good. What about anxiety? That seems to be the #1 complaint for people who can't fall asleep.
You're right. Anxiety, rumination, a racing mind, these are probably the principal causes of chronic insomnia for many people. If anxiety is the primary issue, then cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBTI, is the scientifically proven first-line treatment. It's actually more effective long-term than sleeping pills because it addresses both the negative thought patterns, the cognitive beliefs about sleep, and the unhelpful behaviors people develop around bedtime.
CBTI, right?
Practices like meditation, mindfulness, or guided relaxation techniques can also significantly help to quiet the mind and drop the severity of insomnia symptoms. The key is to avoid anxious rumination and catastrophization about sleep itself when you get into bed. Instead of counting sheep, which scientific studies have actually shown can hurt your sleep onset because it engages your working memory.
Really? Counting sheep is bad.
Apparently so. Instead, try engaging your mind in pleasant, non-activating, low-effort mental tasks. Maybe mentally walk through your childhood home. Imagine a relaxing walk in nature in detail, or even visualize driving a race car if that's your thing. Anything to gently divert the mind away from anxious thought loops about not sleeping.
That's a much better approach than just lying there worrying. Okay, so sleep isn't just a switch. It's this incredibly complex, essential, multi-stage system. What about the ultimate enigma of sleep? Dreams. You've humorously described dreaming, or REM sleep, as being like a temporary, flagrant, psychotic state. What exactly do you mean by that?
Huh. Well, it's partly tongue-in-cheek, but if you break down the core features of dreaming during REM sleep, they strikingly mirror many symptoms of psychosis.
Sir.
Think about it. First, when we dream, we frequently hallucinate. We see things, hear things, feel things that aren't actually there. Second, we often have delusions. We firmly believe things that couldn't possibly be true in waking reality. Third, we become disoriented. We lose track of time, place, and sometimes even our own identity within the dream narrative. Fourth, we experience wildly fluctuating and often intense emotions. And fifth, wonderfully, we typically have amnesia for the entire bizarre experience. Upon waking, we forget most, if not all, of our dreams.
That actually makes a weird kind of sense when you list it like that. Hallucinations, delusions, disorientation.
Right. And all the while, during REM sleep, your brain actively paralyzes your voluntary muscles. Many people don't realize this, but when you go into dream sleep, your brainstem sends signals down your spinal cord to inhibit your motor neurons, essentially locking you in physical incarceration. This prevents you from physically acting out your often very active dreams.
So when I have those common dreams where I'm being chased or trying to fight something, and I'm trying desperately to scream or run or punch, but I just can't move or make a sound, that's actually my brain doing its job correctly, protecting me by paralyzing my muscles.
Exactly. That feeling of paralysis in a dream is a direct reflection of that REM sleep muscle atonia. It's a testament to the brain's incredible built-in protective mechanisms that allow the mind to have these wild experiences safely.
Fascinating. Now, interestingly, what about things like sleepwalking or sleep talking? Are those happening during the psychotic REM state too?
Ah, good question. No, they're actually quite different. Sleepwalking, somnambulism, and sleep talking, somniloquy,
Yeah.
are types of parasomnias, and they typically originate from deep non-REM sleep, usually stages 3 or 4, not from REM sleep.
Oh, so from deep sleep, not dream sleep.
Correct. What seems to happen is the brain gets sort of stuck in a state somewhere between deep sleep and full wakefulness. Parts of the brain, particularly motor areas, become active enough to allow movement or speech, while other parts, especially those involved in conscious awareness and memory formation, remain largely offline in a deep sleep state. You might see deep sleep brainwaves on an EEG, even while the person is physically up and walking around.
And that's why sleepwalkers usually don't remember doing it.
Precisely, because they weren't really awake or in the conscious narrative dreaming state of REM sleep when it happened. It's very common, by the way, for children to sleepwalk or talk, and most grow out of it as their brain development matures and sleep stage transitions become more stable.
Okay, that clarifies that mystery. So beyond being this fascinating, bizarre, temporarily psychotic state, what's the actual function of dreaming? What role does REM sleep play in things like our memory and creativity? Does it genuinely help us solve problems or remember things better, like the old saying, sleep on it?
Yes, it absolutely does seem to play crucial roles there. We talked about how deep non-REM sleep is important for hitting the save button on new memories, consolidating them, future-proofing that information by strengthening the neural circuits, etching the memory trace, essentially.
Right, saving the files.
Exactly. But REM sleep, or dream sleep, appears to be more intelligent, perhaps. It performs what I sometimes call informational alchemy, or maybe group therapy for memories. It doesn't just save the files, it intelligently integrates them.
How does it do that?
During REM sleep, the brain seems to actively stitch new memories together, both with each other and with the vast back catalog of your life experiences. It makes connections, explores associations, sometimes in very non-obvious abstract ways. This process appears to be crucial for gaining insights and fostering creative problem-solving, leading to marked advances in, well, evolutionary fitness, if you think about it broadly. This is likely the biological basis of creativity.
So it's connecting the dots in new ways.
Precisely. You wake up the next morning not just with the memory saved, but with a revised, updated, mind-wide web of associations. This allows you to approach problems from new angles, to find solutions that were previously impenetrable. It's genuinely why you're often told to sleep on a problem, not stay awake all night thinking about a problem. Your brain is actively working on it, processing it in novel ways during REM sleep.
That's amazing. And what about remembering dreams themselves? Why do they evaporate so quickly? Is it true we might actually remember all our dreams, but just lose the ability to access them when we wake up? It's such a common experience to have a really vivid dream that just dissolves the moment you open your eyes.
It's a fascinating question, and the honest answer is we don't know for sure. But one theory I find compelling is that we might actually store or encode almost all of our dream experiences. But when we wake up, we rapidly lose the retrieval pathway, maybe like losing the IP address to that specific memory file.
Ah, availability versus accessibility.
Exactly. The memory might still be available somewhere in the neural network, but it's no longer easily accessible without a specific cue. This could explain why sometimes, days or weeks later, a particular scent, a sound, a passing thought, can suddenly trigger the full vivid recall of a dream you were certain you had completely forgotten.
Yeah, that happens.
If this theory is true, and if memory operates largely unconsciously anyway, then it suggests our waking lives, our moods, our decisions might be subtly shaped and influenced by our stored dream experiences in a far more profound unconscious way than we currently realize. It's an intriguing possibility. And while Sigmund Freud was absolutely instrumental in legitimizing the study of dreams, placing dreaming squarely within the mind and making it a valid domain for neuroscience, his specific testable theories about dream interpretation have, scientifically speaking, largely been proven incorrect. But his emphasis on their importance was key.
Okay, let's bring this back to something very immediate and practical for many people right now. The interplay between sleep, our immune system, and particularly what we learned during the recent COVID-19 pandemic. How intimately linked are these concepts based on the latest science?
The intimate association between sleep health and immune health is undeniable, and the pandemic certainly highlighted it. We already knew from pre-pandemic research, for instance, that individuals habitually sleeping less than 7 hours a night are nearly 3 times more likely to become infected if exposed to the rhinovirus, the common cold virus.
3 times more likely to catch a cold.
Yes. And another large study found that women sleeping 5 hours or less per night were over 60% more likely to develop pneumonia over a 5-year follow-up period. Pneumonia, of course, was a critical factor in COVID-19 mortality. And as we discussed earlier, if you're sleep deprived in the week before your flu shot, and likely other vaccinations too, you produce less than 50% of the normal protective antibody response.
So sleep fundamentally primes our immune system.
It does, in 2 critical ways. Good sleep stimulates the body to produce more immune factors, more natural killer cells, more T cells, more antibodies. And secondly, it increases the receptivity of your immune system to those factors, making the response more effective. You literally wake up each morning as a more immunologically robust individual if you've slept sufficiently. Sleep truly restocks the weaponry in your immune arsenal every single night.
That's a powerful image. So how did the pandemic itself impact our sleep patterns globally? Did we sleep more because of lockdowns or less because of anxiety? And what happened with our dreams?
The impact has been really multifaceted, a mixed bag. On one hand, some large-scale studies using wearable tracker data did show that, on average, sleep duration actually increased by maybe 20 to 30 minutes for many people, likely due to the reduction or elimination of commuting time during lockdowns.
Okay, so some people slept more.
Yes, in terms of quantity. However, there's also a huge cloud of data, mostly from surveys and clinical reports, showing significantly worsening sleep quality for a large portion of the population. This was driven by increased anxiety, stress about health and finances, job loss, disrupted routines, and general uncertainty. So, more time in bed for some, but not necessarily better sleep.
Right, anxiety is terrible for sleep quality.
Absolutely. Sleep timing also shifted dramatically. With less need to commute early, many people naturally started sleeping later, more in synchrony with their inherent biological chronotype. I've jokingly called this the revenge of the night owls, finally getting to sleep and wake when their biology actually prefers, rather than being forced into an early schedule.
Huh, I like that. Revenge of the night owls.
And finally, dreaming. Many people reported experiencing more frequent dreams, more vivid dreams, and often dreams with pandemic-related themes, anxiety dreams, confinement dreams, etc. I think there are two logical explanations for this. First, as people slept later into the morning, they were spending more time in REM sleep, which is heavily concentrated in those later hours, so naturally, more dream recall.
Makes sense.
And second, remember that REM sleep provides that emotional first aid. In times of significant collective stress and emotional upheaval, like a global pandemic, the brain likely ramps up REM sleep processing as a way to try and self-medicate, to work through the anxieties and emotional content of our daily experiences. It tries to strip away that bitter emotional rind from difficult memories, allowing us to wake up feeling a little better, a little more emotionally regulated. It really underscores that it's not just time that heals all wounds. It's time spent during sleep, and specifically during REM dream sleep, that provides essential emotional convalescence.
That's a fascinating and actually quite comforting thought that our brains are actively working overnight to help us cope emotionally during tough times. Looking ahead now, what do you see as the future of sleep science and sleep medicine? What role will technology, wearables, and maybe personalized approaches play?
Well, while technology, especially screens, has certainly been a deleterious force in the bedroom environment for many years, I'm not entirely puritanical about it. The genie is out of the bottle, so to speak. What we're now beginning to see is technology potentially starting to hack its own ills.
How so?
Wearable technology devices like the Oura Ring, Whoop Strap, newer smartwatches, they're becoming increasingly sophisticated at tracking not just movement, but core body temperature, heart rate variability, respiratory rate. This data can offer valuable insights into sleep stages and overall physiological stress. Some research even suggests that subtle changes in these metrics picked up by wearables could potentially serve as an early warning sign, a useful diagnostic tool, or a precursor for illnesses like COVID-19, sometimes even before symptoms appear.
That's incredible potential.
It is. The ultimate goal here is moving towards truly personalized sleep medicine. Getting beyond the generic tips like the ones we've discussed today, which are great starting points, and moving towards tailored advice based on an individual's unique physiology, genetics, lifestyle, and real-time sleep patterns. This would allow for truly customized sleep optimization strategies for maximizing health and performance.
So, are these trackers always a good thing? I know some people get really obsessive about their daily sleep scores, almost like it's another thing to stress about, another metric to fail at.
That's a very valid and important concern. There's actually a newly described condition some clinicians are calling orthosomnia, literally meaning correct sleep. It's essentially a sleep disorder caused by an obsessive pursuit of perfect sleep, often fueled by overly zealous sleep tracking. People become so anxious about achieving a good sleep score that the anxiety itself ironically disrupts their sleep.
Right, the tracking becomes the problem.
Exactly. So my advice for using these trackers is to focus on the bigger picture. Use them to understand your weekly or monthly trend lines, not as nightly headlines or reasons to panic. Don't obsess over a single night's bad score. Sleep naturally varies. They are tools to help calibrate your own intuition about how you feel and to understand your overall patterns, but don't let them become another source of stress or anxiety. Listen to your body first and foremost.
Good advice. Use them as a guide, not a dictator.
Precisely. And always come back to the core message. Prioritizing sufficient quality sleep is arguably the single most effective thing that any of us can do each and every day to reset the health of our brain and our body. It truly is the Archimedes lever, the foundational master dial that naturally raises all other health boats: diet, exercise, mental wellness when you get it right.
So we've covered a huge amount today, delving into why sleep evolved, what happens during its different stages, and the really profound impact, both positive and negative, it has on literally every aspect of our lives. Our hormones, immune system, metabolism, genes, heart health, brain health like Alzheimer's risk, weight, mental health, addiction, memory, learning, creativity. It's staggering.
It really touches everything.
It truly underscores that sleep isn't a luxury or a sign of weakness. It's the absolute foundation of our physical and mental well-being.
Absolutely. Understanding this and then prioritizing sleep based on that understanding is not optional. It is a fundamental biological necessity that shapes every aspect of our existence and truly empowers us to live healthier, more productive, and hopefully happier lives.
So here's a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. Considering sleep's profound influence not just on basic health, but on complex functions like memory integration, creativity, and emotional regulation, how might consciously cultivating our relationship with this often mysterious nightly state not just improve our daily functioning, but perhaps even unlock deeper potential in who we are and what we can achieve?
That's a powerful thought to end on. And remember, you have the power to take charge of your sleep health. It is never too late to start sleeping better and reaping the benefits. If you want to learn more and dive even deeper, I highly recommend exploring the work of Dr. Matthew Walker. You can find his resources easily online. Maybe start with his website, thesleepdiplomat.com, or his really insightful and accessible book, Why We Sleep.
Excellent recommendations. Thank you so much for sharing all this incredible insight today. It's been truly eye-opening.
My pleasure is a topic I'm deeply passionate about.
And thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, sleep well.